Everybody, it's Alex, and it is Monday, January 15th, and I got to have a snow day today! Woo! Which is nice because it means that I am not a little Alexical? Because, when I got to site this morning, it was like 20 degrees and super icy, so I'm very glad that I did not stay where there was like a broken ankle waiting to happen. And I figured I would. This is going to be my 50th vlog, even though my 50th was technically on Friday, and it was sad. So this is like 50th part A, and I'm gonna do something a little different for this time, which is answer questions. So hopefully that's gonna be fun. So I asked people if they had questions on Twitter, and we got some good questions on Twitter, and then. Yeah, if you heard that noise, that was the cat, like, sharpening his... See, there he is. You can just see him in the corner of the screen. There's the cat. Yeah, he's been a lump all day. Well, my housemate and I were finishing watching The Punisher, because, I was like, might as well just marathon this thing through to the end, and oh my god, like, I was just... Oh, the last two episodes! Oh my god, I was just, like, literally screaming, and it takes a lot for there to be on-screen violence that will make me, like, actually, like, cover my eyes, and it went there, so, holy shit, and I kind of resent Marvel a little bit for actually making me like the Punisher, because I kind of never gave a shit about him as a character before, but we live in strange times. Oh, and if you're wondering about my t-shirt, it's my ugly Star Wars Christmas sweater t-shirt that my housemate Ivona gave me for Christmas. So anyway, on to your questions. This is from Cecelia. She says, rocks! Please talk about rocks. Are there any you especially like or dislike? Why? So I don't know if I've ever told the shit rock story, but that would be a rock I dislike just because when I was working at Core Lab, you were supposed to, you know, when you're describing a core, you, like, put all the lithologies down, and part of classifying the lithologies, and you end up putting them on, like, plots, because that will, like, tell you something about the data, and, you know, like, how much of what lithology is in the core, blah, blah, blah. So, I had this core that, mineralogically, it was, like, 30% clay and 30% quartz, which basically means sand, and 30% dolomite. And when you look at, like, a mineralogy plot, it was, like, literally, like, sitting in the center point where a bunch of lines crossed, so you couldn't fucking tell what kind of rock it was. And I got so frustrated with it because so much of the core was this lithology, I just started describing it as shit rock. And kept doing so until my boss was like, this is fine, you can call it shit rock in your notes, but you're gonna have to come up with, like, an actual non-offensive name for it and just come up with some kind of classification for it when we present this core. So I had to come up with something that was not shit rock, but that tells you how I felt about that particular kind of rock. And it was just like this sort of, like, you know, really fine-grained brown shit rock. And, you know, that is a really good example of some of the problems with geology, though, because it's like a classification issue, where when you classify something, it requires sharp divisions, where pretty much everything is on some kind of sliding scale. Like, everything is a spectrum of, you know, there's, like, the sliding scale of how much mineralogy A and B and C has in it, and if you look at, like, what they're called is, they look like triangle mineralogy plots. I mean, things will just be, like, all over the map, and classification is a problem, and as soon as you draw one line, then you will find, like, the one thing that sits exactly on that line, and you're just like, thanks, reality, for making my life difficult, because that's how it works. And then I think... So, basically, the kind that just make your life difficult by resisting classification are my least favorite kind of rocks, because also they're normally kind of ugly. And then, to be honest, like, rocks that I especially like, I don't know, I've always really liked calcite, as a mineral, because it's really cool, and it has rhombohedral fracture, which is why, and it's perfect, so it always fractures into these beautiful angular rhombohedrons, and one of its optical properties is double refraction. So if you have a thin enough piece that you can see through it and you like put it on a newspaper, all the letters look doubled through that, and that's really cool. Or like when it starts fracturing, you get this really neat rainbow oil slick effect on the surface of it. It's super pretty. And then just generally, other than shit rocks, I really like sedimentary rocks because that's how you explore a lot of Earth history. Because that's where, it records climate data and all that, like in paleosols. And paleosols I love just because they're really pretty. That's fossilized soils, and they have like nodules in them, and they look cool, and you can see root traces, and that's kind of neat. Because you basically, with a sedimentary rock, you can pick it up and see just like a little peek into life history from normally just millions of years ago, and that feels really cool when you do that. So I guess that's probably a broad category of my favorite kind of rocks. And I really like carbonates, which is like limestones and dolomites. And I think it's just mostly because I did classic sedimentary rocks all through college. I'm just charmed by carbonates because I didn't get scarred by them for life in my master's classes. And plus they're just really pretty if you do optical mineralogy at all and look at thin sections, because calcite always stains like this really pretty red or pink, and dolomite will stain purple, and you can see fossils in there and like generations of cement, and they're just really neat and complex, and you can learn these really cool stories from tiny thin sections as well. And one of some of the most fun times I had in grad school were learning to identify different kinds of fossils, like fossil fragments, by looking at thin sections in carbonate rocks. So that's like maybe my favorite. And then dolomite's just cool because dolomite ruins everything. It just overprint. It's a secondary mineral growth, and it tends to just overprint everything on carbonates. So sometimes you can see the shadow of what was once there, but otherwise, we used to joke that we were going to have t-shirts that just said dolomite ruins everything. And yet for some reason I like dolomite despite the fact that it ruins everything. So that should tell you something about me. All right, next question, which was kind of a cool one that I had to do like some actual research on, which is from Kate, and she asks, can salt, as in sodium chloride, occur naturally in rocks, etc., without water? So my automatic answer was no, because sodium chloride, which is also known as halite, that's its mineral name, is an evaporite, along with, the other evaporites like anhydrite and sylvite, and gypsum's an evaporite as well. So, like, the only way you really see them is when you've had salt water that's begun to evaporate, hence evaporite, and then it concentrate, you get a higher and higher brine concentration, which allows the precipitation of the salts. And there's like really cool stuff that I would have to go and seek out and read the articles on about like what kind of brine concentrations give you like what sort of evaporite, and at what point you get halite, and why you'll just see different like evaporite layerings in old basins and things like that. But I was like, it might not be that simple, so I went and I did a bunch of research. And part of the issue is to get a mineral that is an evaporite like halite or gypsum or any of those, all of them are ionically bonded minerals. So you have to have conditions that are going to allow the ions to be in solution and associated with each other, and then allow them to bond with each other rather than more strongly with something else that will then, in sufficient concentrations that will allow them to become a solid. So that's why, you kind of definitionally need a brine. And I really couldn't find anything else, like other weird rocks where you could get evaporite minerals without having a brine. And then the other thing I started thinking about was, okay, does it have to be a water brine? And the issue there is that, if nothing else, in order to have a brine that will give you an evaporite, you need a liquid that, you could say that the salt could dissolve in originally to begin with. So that means you need a polar liquid, So like if you've this was a thing that I looked up, and it made sense when I looked it up, but like salt will not dissolve in oil because oil is a nonpolar liquid. So it needs to be a polar liquid, and it needs to be such that the salt or the ions that will eventually make your evaporite, your halite, will not react with the liquid itself. So it needs to be a polar liquid that is non-reactive with sodium and chloride, basically. So, like, technically speaking, you can dissolve salt in ammonia, but you will not be able to make that into a brine that will give you halite otherwise, because the ammonia will react with the chloride or the chlorine, and everything will be terrible, which is, why you don't mix ammonia and bleach. So that's the other thing. My housemate Karina helped me with this question a little bit, like trying to come up with other polar fluids and things like that. And one that we came up with that might be able to work would maybe be ethanol. Though the issue with that is, say, at standard temperature and pressure, ethanol is not going to react in the same way as water when it comes to evaporation and concentrating your ions. So, but I mean, maybe you could like make up a weird planet where you have like ethanol or methanol seas, and maybe you could get evaporites out of that. I don't know. But that was kind of the best that we could come up with, because like, those are polar fluids that do not necessarily react with your sodium and chlorine. I keep calling them chloride ions, but I think it's chlorine. Karina, is that right?
Chloride ions. Chlorine is either the pure form of the element or the gas.
There we go. I don't know if you could hear that, but yeah, it is chloride ions. Okay, so maybe methanol and ethanol. I don't know. Maybe if someone's a chemist out there, they can correct me on that, because chemistry was never my thing. I've never been that interested in the sex life of atoms. Atoms. I mean, I don't care about atoms either. So I hope that answers the question. All right, next we have a question from Farli, who asked, how much story do you invest in your D&D/tabletop character via backstory, and how much do you leave to the DM or random chance from game nonsense? So what I tend to do, as long as I have a DM that is willing to work with me on this, and for the most part I've had very awesome DMs who are willing to work with me, is... and I come up with like a very generalized backstory. So like, say for my rogue in D&D, I was like, okay, so he started off life being raised in a religious cult of some sort. I think initially it was going to be like a cult of Bahamut that was not really one. It was like run by a warlock or something. And then he got out and fell in with bad company, and then he was escaping the bad company, and that's how he like met all of his friends. So it's like this really, I could summarize it in 2 to 3 sentences, and then it's always just been like, as I see the direction the game is going, or the DM is like, here's this fucked up thing, I'm like, okay, then I will add some detail to it, and I will check with the DM and make sure that they're cool with, this new added layer of fucked upness. And I can't think of a time when they haven't been, because it's always like, so I had an idea on how to make my character suffering even worse, and normally the DM is like, yes, I love it, let's do this. So like in a different D&D game I'm in, I've got a character who was just basically a gladiator for like 30 years, and then he retired, and that is like it for his backstory. And then he made a deal with a god so he could go off become a bard, because that was like pursuing his joy. And I'm sure that terrible things are going to appear from that backstory as we move on in the game, because it's so open to the DM being like, oh, here's one of your old opponents that you didn't kill and now they hate you. Or here's your psychotic fan that's been following you. Or, things like that. And I'm always game for that stuff. And then, I'll if we're running into a situation where no one already has a backstory hook into it, a lot of times I'll be like, so, wait, what if this is in some way related to this terrible thing that happened that, is just part of the terrible... awfulness that is this generalized backstory. So I prefer to do that, because I need enough to kind of understand generally what the character's attitude is going to be, but then I think it's a lot more fun to then cooperatively ruin their life with the DM. And I that seems to work. So, we'll keep going with that. Let's see. Next question is from Valerie, which is, do you have thoughts about the ways in which rocks/crystals are used in magic systems and whether that can be made more realistic based on their actual properties? So, I mean, when it's like a magic system, it's magic. I don't care. It drives me absolutely batshit when there's like new age wooby cure nonsense that has to do with minerals and crystals, particularly because like as a geologist and someone who has done basic mineralogy, it drives me batshit when it's people are like they confuse gemstones with minerals because, for example, what is it? Rubies and sapphires are considered to be two distinct gemstones, but they're all corundum. Or like emeralds are considered to be a distinct kind of gemstone when they're actually just beryls. So that makes me a little crazy because I'm just like, there is not really that much that makes these things different from uglier minerals. They're just shiny and you really like them. But, when it's a magic system, whatever. Though I've noticed that a lot of times when people use gems or minerals in regards to like a magic system, they focus very much on like the physical properties or like it's super shiny or it has a really neat vitreous luster or things like that, where if you wanted to go like somewhere different and cool and unique with it, what you could do would be like take a look at crystal systems and point groups and the things that actually make up the classification of of minerals, because a lot of how you do mineral classification and a lot of what determines a mineral's optical properties are its crystal system. And that is like, mineralogy is, I think it was basically just invented by drug addicts who were like looking at crystals like, whoa. Because so much of just figuring out a particular mineral's crystal system is taking a crystal and like rotating it and being like, oh, well, if I cut it this way, that's like a twofold axis of symmetry, but here there's, here's an axis of symmetry that's threefold, which means like, when I run an axis down here, I can turn it like 3 times and it'll be the same every time I turn it. Like, you spend so much time in basic mineralogy with like wooden models of crystals, like staring at them and like rotating them and being like, oh, I think this one has a mirror plane, maybe about this. But it's kind of like some of my favorite minerals all fall under the isometric crystal system, which means it's basically cubic in some way. Or what it means is that all of the optical axes are the same length. So like if you look at it in thin section under cross-polarized light, they turn black. They become opaque because it's a polarization thing. So it would be really cool to see somebody kind of mess with that, like, like, oh, maybe we can only do this magic with particular isometric minerals, and then the different preferred crystal forms that you get with isometric minerals then become like different keys to different properties. I don't know. But the other thing to realize when I'm talking like isometric, basically everything except the D4 in your dice set would be an isometric crystal if it was some kind of mineral. That's every single one of those, from the D8 to the D20, or sorry, the D6 to the D20. Those are all isometric forms. So, basically, like, it's not something that bothers me that much, just because, it's fiction, so whatever. And sometimes people get kind of like sophisticated with it. Some of the stuff in D&D is really silly, though. I find it kind of hilarious, with the diamond for resurrection and all that, and it has to be like the more expensive one to bring someone back to life, which basically just means it has to be prettier and have fewer impurities, whatever. But that you could go cooler places with it if you were really interested in trying to have some kind of like scientific magic system that is related to mineral properties or crystal properties, but it would just take more research than I think most people are willing to do. And I that's not something personally that I'm ever going to do, because I don't like really super scientific magic systems, because I'm just like, it's magic. Though I was always joking, like, I don't know if it would be fun, but you could totally make like an app game that teaches you how to identify crystal systems and point groups. That could be fun for like people who really like doing spatial problems, I guess. I don't know. Probably the same people who think the protein folding game is fun would probably think that like a crystal system game is fun. But anyway, so. And then let's see, we got 3 questions from Paul Weimer. Let's see, first, he said, Eocene mammals for DMs to use in D&D. I think it's because I mentioned Eocene mammals when I was like saying, hey everybody, ask me questions. And I mean, I don't actually know that much about Eocene mammals. Because I completely skipped out on paleontology, because I think basically when I was taking my bachelor's coursework, my options were either I could take paleontology or everyone had to take structural. It was either paleontology or maybe geochem, and it was just geochem looked like it was going to be more useful. Plus the timing of it worked out, because I think it was like if I had taken paleontology one year, I wouldn't have been able to take sedimentology and stratigraphy, which is what I really, really, really wanted to take. So I just totally missed out on it. And basically everything I know about paleontology, I learned from doing optical mineralogy and learning to identify calcareous shell fragments in thin sections. So, like, what I know about mammals is basically like this, like 0. But I do know from being in the Bighorn Basin Coring Project, which focused on the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum and the second Eocene thermal maximum, that during like the early Eocene related to these thermal maxima, there was like this weird thing that made a lot of the mammals get all tiny and cute, which I like to joke about, and no one's quite sure why. It's a thing that happened. But, like, basically the only Eocene mammal I know off the top of my head is Smilodectes, which is this little tiny, like, squirrel-sized primate that's a little, like, lemur. It's, native to North America, and it's really cute, and I think we had one major fossil that ended up in one of our cores, like, we just punched right through it, I guess, and when we cut the core in half, you could see like most of this fossil, and he'd been stained purple because of the chemistry of the soil around him. And I think that was a Smilodectes, but don't quote me because that was years ago. But anyway, he was super cute, like in as much as a tiny skeleton can be cute in a kind of creepy but adorable way. So that's all I've really. So I mean, like for DMs, like, you could have like tiny little squirrel-sized primates or like Eohippus, and proto-horses are Eocene mammals as well. And so that's what I always think of, though I know later in the Eocene, I think, is when you started to get like the really freaking scary hoofed mammals that got bigger and bigger and bigger. Though they were not as huge as the ones we had like in the Ice Ages. But, I don't know if you want like tiny cute mammals. There you go, DMs. Let's see. What was the paleogeography of North America before the glaciers like? The most recent glaciation was not that long ago. I mean, starting the most recent glacial period. Let's see. I think it was. Oh God. It was like at the end of the Pliocene, was it? God, I'm gonna feel really dumb. I think, yeah, it was Pliocene quaternary, which makes it 2.6 million years ago. So that really wasn't that long ago. You're talking about what did North America look like 3 million years ago? And the answer was there was more relief kind of like in the Midwest area because that's the part that got smushed by the ice sheet. And like I think and Florida was basically underwater and parts of the East Coast were underwater because pre-major glaciation the sea levels were a lot higher. But it really, like, 3 million years is geologically not that tremendously long, and it didn't look that different. Which I'll link to like some of Blakey's pictures so you can take a look at kind of the best guess of what it probably looked like back then. And, you know, sorry that it's not like wildly different. It was just a lot warmer. And then let's see, 5 favorite veg out movies. Okay. So that's because I was talking about Jumanji as kind of like a, you know, stupid veg out movie where you don't have to really think about anything. So let me think. Hot Fuzz is my number 1. It's also the greatest movie ever made, and I will hear nothing otherwise. Honestly, some of the scary movies, like, I think it's basically the odd-numbered ones. I don't know. They're all terrible and stupid, but I really, really like them. Kung Fu Hustle. I freaking love that movie, and it also does not require a whole lot of thought. For a long time, one of my favorite veg out movies was actually Hackers because it's just so silly and terrible. I haven't watched that one anytime recently, but I think that definitely makes the list. And then, what would I make for the 5th one? It used to be Ghostbusters, and then I finally realized how creepy Venkman is, so that kind of killed my enjoyment of Ghostbusters. So, it's not a movie, but Great British Bake Off. To be honest, like, I just put that on and crochet and everything is fine. So, hopefully you've enjoyed this edition of Ask Alex Questions, because it was kind of fun to just answer oddball questions, especially that one about sodium chloride. That was really cool. And yay! I've made 50 vlogs! If you hear that, that's the sound of the cat peeing. So I think on that note, we will call it a good one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great Monday night. Bye!